morning, church. I'm excited today to talk to you about Daniel chapter 10 and Daniel chapter 11. Really, if you consider being a Jew reading the book of Daniel, it's actually meant to be read in its entirety, and it's like a movie. So this is the real crescendo of the end of the movie, sort of the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel has all been about persecution. So we've seen individual persecutions, whether it be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Daniel. And then what we've really got to the end is we're going to be talking today about the worst persecution of the Jews ever. And so this whole theme of Daniel, which is God is in control no matter what is happening, this is the real crescendo. It's going to be chapter 10 and 11, so it's going to take a bit of time. But what you'll really see here is that the prophecies are really astounding. So the title really is Daniel, a Man in the Battle. And we're going to start in Daniel chapter 10, verse 1, and go all the way through to chapter 11, verse 1. It says, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of this message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice foods. No meat or wine touched my lips. I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around my waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice was like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. Then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of Persia, of the Persian kingdom, resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, because I was detained there by the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. While he was saying this to me, I bowed with my face toward the ground and was speechless. Then one who looked like a man touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and began to speak. I said to the one standing before me, I am overcome with anguish because of the vision, my Lord, and I feel very weak. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone, I can hardly breathe. Again, the one who looked like a man touched me and gave me strength. Do not be afraid, you are highly esteemed, he said. Peace, be strong now, be strong. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, speak, my Lord, since you have given me strength. So he said, do you know why I have come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first, I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against him except Michael, your prince. And in this first year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to support and protect him. So Daniel 10 to 12 give us the last recorded vision given to Daniel. By now, Daniel's most probably about 80 years old, and he's told that a revelation concerns a great war. This must have been a completely overwhelming vision. I mean, Daniel is so upset that when he sees what will happen to God's people, he mourns for 3 weeks. So this is not like the good news sharing. This is like bad things are coming. The vision is so overwhelming that the entire 10th chapter of Daniel is devoting to describing how much God had to encourage and strengthen Daniel in order for him just to be able to receive it. We've always got to remember when we're studying the Bible with people, or we're challenging people with the scriptures in discipling, they need an enormous amount of encouraging. You know, it's not just, you can't just get with people who do Bible study after Bible study after Bible study. They're not used to that sort of thing. As older Christians, sometimes we have great quiet times every day. We're used to challenging each other. We're spiritually fit. But when we give, initial vision to people, we've got to really put the extra in with the encouragement, just like God did to Daniel here. That's why we, go to movies, have food, play Risk, and all those fun sort of things. But Daniel tells us of his vision 3 weeks before, right now, where he sees a man on the banks of the river, the Tigris. Some have suggested that this is Jesus because of the parable with the description in Revelation. So in Daniel 10:6, it talks about how his body was like crystallite, his face is like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of the multitude. Well, we've already seen the connection between Daniel and Revelation, but in Revelation 1:13, again, when the revelation comes to the Apostle John, it says, among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was like white wool, and white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing water. In his right hand he held the 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. Also, we notice here that the men that are with Daniel are actually unable to see the vision. This is an obvious parallel when Jesus appeared to Paul in Acts 9, verse 1-8, or Saul as he was then. In Acts 9:7 it says, the men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. So you can see why people are sort of going, this possibly could be Jesus. However, the effect the vision had on Daniel himself was he was left with no strength, and his face turned deathly pale, and he felt like, I am helpless. That's how we often feel when the truth comes to us. He's so overwhelmed that he falls into a deep sleep, a little bit like Elijah when he, after the prophet of Baal. He's with his face to the ground. It was just like, one of those, I've fallen asleep. If this is how Daniel feels meeting possibly Jesus, imagine what Judgment Day will be like. I think sometimes we think of Judgment Day, it's so far away, I know I'm going to get judged and everything. We don't really grasp what Judgment Day will be like. It will be overwhelming, especially for those on the wrong side. After lying there unconscious for basically an unknown length of time, Daniel relates and said, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. Daniel never specifies who it is, but most certainly Daniel is revived by the touch of an angel. So we've got just 2 points today. The first one is the spiritual battle. It says the angel goes on to relate an amazing story. It says, in Daniel 10:12, it says, since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and humble yourself before your God, your words were heard and I have come in response to them. God has sent this angel to Daniel in response to his humble prayers. What a great encouragement as maybe an 80-year-old man to learn that all that determination, all that determination to remain righteous, even though you're surrounded by a pagan world, most of who don't even believe in God, has caught God's attention. We know the scriptures that talk about how God ranges through the land just to look for those righteous people. There are so few too righteous people that God's like, man, I'm really going to hunt them out. I'm waiting, I'm listening for them. As disciples today, we must get great encouragement from this, to set our minds to gain understanding. How do we do that? That's deep Bible study. It's not just reading your Bible 15 minutes and ticking a box and telling your leader, hey, I've read my Bible. It's, do you know your Bible? And then to humble yourself. Well, you can't humble yourself unless you know what you've got to humble yourself from. As we study the scriptures, as we realize that we're not what God calls us to be, and then we go to God and pray and go, God, I'm so sorry that I'm proud. I'm so sorry that I'm just apathetic. Please help me change. It's this recognition that we need God and we need to change. The theme of Daniel is revealed once again. Don't lose heart. God will reward your humble and patient service to him. Sometimes it really does feel like the whole world is against us. Well, it is because they're non-Christians. But God goes, it is you who I treasure, faithful disciple. The angel then relates to Daniel that on his way to encourage him, he was held up in a spiritual battle. This is a longer than expected confrontation with Satan that had made him late to bring help to Daniel. It says, but the prince of Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. So what kind of battle is this? And who is this, prince of the Persian kingdom referred to by the angel? Surely the angel is describing a spiritual battle. Behind the earthly battle scene, there is a constant parallel spiritual battle being waged war in the heavenly realms. We're reminded of this in Ephesians 6:12. It says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the power of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. As Daniel is fighting his own battles with the pagan world around him down on earth, the whole time there is a spiritual battle being waged war for our souls and the souls of the kingdom around us that most of the time we're completely unaware of. Especially, Daniel's being reminded of this. How often do we really focus on the spiritual? If we really, could tune in to what really was going on spiritually around us, we wouldn't be so surprised when, bad things happen to us. We face opposition so often. It's like, I'm going to really decide today. I'm going to have my great prayer time tomorrow morning. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to set my alarm. And then your batteries run out mysteriously that night so you don't wake up. And then at that moment you have to choose. Am I going to be discouraged? Am I going to go, hey, I see the hand of Satan in this situation? We've got to watch out for those demons and their satanic schemes in your life. So who is this prince of Persia or the prince of the Persian kingdom? Apparently, this is the demonic personal power whose hand is behind evil things that happen in Persia. It's not the physical king of the physical Persian kingdom. One can be sure of that because of the reference in Daniel 10:20. Here the angel speaks to Daniel of an archangel. In the same breath he uses to describe his angels fight against the prince of Persia. Therefore, the prince of Persia is a demonic angel. He's an angel that has fallen with Satan on the earth, and he's going, I am going to champion the cause of this nation. So from the vision of Daniel, one can conclude that there are specific angels acting as defenders of individual nations. Besides that, it would appear that there are also specific demonic beings lurking behind the scenes to lead individual nations astray. So as much as Israel has its own angels to protect it, then these fallen angels that basically are against God goes, I'll tell you what, I'll take the Persian nation and I'll really just, champion their cause to try and destroy Israel. I'll take the Roman Empire. I'll take, whatever empire it is so that we can set ourselves up against God and his armies. So the implication of Daniel chapter 10 is that even now there are battles being fought that we are completely unaware of. These battles have dramatic implication for our personal lives. One can assume that Daniel took great comfort from that when he's really sort of got clued into, hey, there is a war going on and I'm on the right side. And hey, the two most powerful angels, archangels, they're on my side. However, if you're listening today and you're not a Christian, that should make you feel very insecure that you don't have those angels on your side. But actually you are part of the demonic kingdom and those evil demons that are just, forcing our nations to try and not make things spiritual. That's why we face opposition in trying to set up churches, why we face opposition in certain countries where you can't register a church. Why? Because there are demonic powers working against us. So who is this unidentified angel who's speaking to Daniel in this vision? Well, it's difficult to say for sure since the angel is not identified by name. But the most reasonable conjecture would be that the angel speaking to Daniel is the other archangel spoken about in the Bible. So it's most likely Gabriel himself. Looking back at Daniel 8:16 and Daniel 9:21 would give a lot of credence to that. One is left with the impression that Michael and Gabriel are the archangels who are given specific responsibility to watch over the nation of Israel. This means that in the kingdom of God today, who would most probably be looking after us? The same archangel Michael and Gabriel. How much confidence do we have in that? Hey, God, that Michael and Gabriel, they're pretty awesome dudes. How about sending them to Sydney, Australia to help us out this month? We may not be the biggest, or maybe their best buddy, their greatest disciple. I don't know, God, but send us a few here to help us. I'm definitely going to start praying that. Back again to the story. So Gabriel tells Daniel that he was delayed for the past 21 days, because he'd been in a battle with his prince of Persia. So this apparent standoff was to only settle when Michael came to assist Gabriel in this battle against the evil power in heaven. Just imagine sitting down with Michael and Gabriel once we get to them and go, hey, can we hear some old war stories? I know I love getting with the older Christians, and you go, well, you're the really old Christian, Joe. No, there are older Christians than me. I remember after we planted the Hong Kong church, and Kip had come in, and Elena, and we sat around, we had a victory dinner, and, we were talking about the old movement and how big it grew, and say, did we ever get into North Korea? And it was like, yeah, we did. And so, well, how did we do it? And he gave all this story about, well, we planted this church, and everyone was just like, whoa, tell us more stories, tell us more stories, tell us more stories. There's this great encouragement of hearing all the victories. Later in this conversation with Daniel, Gabriel will tell him that he is off next to continue the battle. So the war never finishes. He says, but during this battle against the prince of Greece will come. So here we see that now he's telling us, hey, this battle is going to include Greece. Gabriel told Daniel, I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. So we're really starting to see here, he's talking about the immediate future, or fairly immediate future, and it's going to include Greece. So this is obviously a likely reference to the future historical attack of Alexander the Great against the Persian Empire, or the Greek kingdoms against the Jews, which will be the subject of Daniel chapter 11. But Daniel is so overwhelmed by the explanation given to him by Gabriel that he bows to the ground, completely unable to speak. Daniel 10:16 says, then one who looked like a man touched his lips, and I opened my mouth and began to speak. This is Gabriel again giving him strength. Daniel's now able to speak, but he's still so devastated by the vision that he was physically exhausted to the point that he could barely even breathe. In verse 18, Gabriel touches Daniel for a third time. One can see the parallel here between Jesus and the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew 26:36 to 46, where he had to go and pray 3 times. Sometimes we get so discouraged, or our friends or disciples get so encouraged, 1 hug is not enough. 2 hugs is not enough. Sometimes you've got to have 3 really great prayer times with somebody, really great times just to really turn them around. I think we're in a society where we want everything to be fixed so quick. We go out to pray, oh, I'm discouraged. Give him a hug, go, you okay now? You go, no, not really. Why not? I hugged you. Get on. It takes a lot of encouragement. We're in an incredibly intense battle. We need to be supremely encouraging individuals to other people in the church. Finally, then, Daniel is strengthened enough for the vision to continue. And this must have been quite a vision, as we will see. Now, can you remember when the penny dropped for you about understanding the truth when you studied the Bible? When you understood there was not just a God that we were to worship and obey, but how Satan was leading the whole world astray. Not the whole world, yes, but more intensely, your whole world, your family, your friends. Revelation 12:9 says, the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth and the angels with him. I remember when I understood that my family was lost. They were religious, but they were lost. I was overwhelmed. I ran. I remember when I cannot handle this. And I went and said, I stopped attending church. I went, if this is the truth, I just cannot handle it. Because I was so unreligious, I looked up in them in awe. And then when I realized what a true disciple was, that we should be out evangelizing, making disciples, we need to be repentant, getting baptized, forgiven of sins. And I really started to see, when I look at these other churches, it's just not what's in the Bible. And then there was this overwhelming, that means I've got to stand up not only against the non-religious world, but the religious world. And sometimes that can discourage you. I just don't want to get into it with my religious family. I don't want to cause more arguments. I just want to go off and do my own thing. You can't win a war by defending. You can't win a war by retreating. You've got to win a war by getting to grips with the scriptures and going, right, I'm going to know my Bible so well that I'm going to be a soldier of Christ that gets out there and fights the fight. Now, before proceeding, Gabriel informs Daniel that what he is telling him is written in the book of truth. He's going, you need to understand that this is the truth. So the revelation comes straight from the word of God. The entire chapter 10 of Daniel was required to describe the preparation of Daniel just to handle this vision. There's a whole chapter going, guys, this vision is so overwhelming. I mean, if it's going to be overwhelming for Daniel, who's this super mega spiritual guy, put your seatbelt on, because if it overwhelmed him to want to go and sleep, and no, Schuster, that doesn't mean you can have a sleep this afternoon. Okay, you're a big boy. You can handle this vision coming. But it means that, hey, this is going to be a pretty amazing vision. So finally, the prophetic vision begins. And we go on to point 2, the battle on earth. Sorry. All right, we're going to start in Daniel 11, chapter 2. And we're going to talk about the kings that we've already talked about in Daniel chapter 8. It says, Daniel 11:2, now then I tell you the truth. 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and then a 4th, who will be far richer than all the others. When he has gained power by his wealth, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king will arise who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. After he has risen, his empire will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 winds of heaven. It will not go to his descendants, nor will it have the power he exercised, because his empire will be uprooted and given to others. So the 3 more kings referred to in this vision are Cyrus and his successors, Cambyses and Darius I. The 4th king Daniel is talking about is Xerxes, who reigned from 486 to 465 BC. The reign of Xerxes the first represents the zenith, the pinnacle of Persian power. The only remaining rival to Persia in the Near East at this time was Greece. Persia was the incredible power. Xerxes staked his entire wealth and prestige of Persia on a huge campaign to conquer the unified Greek military power under the leadership in Athens. He actually, what he did with all the wealth, just to give you an indication of how rich he was, he actually had a great canal built across the Cape of Athos in Greece in preparation for his naval assault in order to avoid the stormy peninsula. Xerxes spent 3 years building up provisions at strategic locations. He recruited soldiers from 46 nations. So this is reference to he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece, as Daniel prophesied. And he employed 29 generals to command his army. Perhaps the most incredible, he had a bridge built across the Straits of the Dardanelles, which separates Asia from Europe. He did this by connecting a great number of ships to one another, allowing his army to march directly from Asia into Europe. To this day, no other bridge has ever been built across the Dardanelles. This was one of the greatest military achievements of all time. And yet Daniel tells us in detail about this great battle 56 years before it occurs in 480 BC. So we're starting to see now the prophecies that Daniel is going to get into, the specifics of this passage, are literally mind-blowing. There is no way that a man could have known these. So what the angel did not tell Daniel is that after some initial success of Xerxes, the campaign was to be a failure. The defeat of Xerxes marks the turning point and the back and forth conflict between Persia and the Greek power. At this point, the vision leaps forward to the next significant conflict between the Greeks and the Persians. Why just a small sort of section on this? Well, it's because we've already talked about this in Daniel chapter 8. So it's just making reference to what, initially, if you were just reading the book in its entirety, you go, let me just remind you of chapter 8. Okay, we talked about that, now let's move on. But basically, it moves on to the next significant bit, and he goes in Daniel 11:3, then a mighty king will appear who will rule with great power and do as he pleases. This mighty king is Alexander the Great. There's a gap of 130 years between Xerxes and Alexander the Great. And then after Alexander the Great, son of Philip of Macedon, burst onto the scenes, the angel continues telling Daniel that after this king leaves the scene, his kingdom will be parceled out into the 4 pieces. This is undeniably a reference to the 4 succeeding kings who followed Alexander. And he talks about how it won't go to his sons, but it'll be parceled out to the 4 different parts, which was, again, the topic of Daniel chapter 8. But now we're really going to home in on the sort of climax of the whole book, which is he's going to now talk about the kings of the south and the kings of the north in Daniel 11. And this is where the persecution is all leading up to against the Jews. And some really important things to understand by the end of it. I've given a graph here, really of the kings of the south and the kings of the north, and the verses that they are alluding to in Daniel. So a little bit like, you've got the kings of Israel and kings of Judah, all the way through the book of Kings. You see how they go hand in hand. But the astounding actually of these prophecies are unbelievable. So tighten up, we're going to go through these specifically to really give you an indication of just how specific God's word is in knowing the past, the present, and the future. But in Daniel chapter 11, verse 5, it says, "The king of the south will become strong, but one of his own commanders will become even stronger than he and will rule in his own kingdom with great power. After some years, they will become allies. The daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an alliance, but she will not retain her power, and he and his power will not last. In those days, she will be betrayed together with her royal escort and her father and the one who supported her. One from her family line will arise to take her place. He will attack the forces of the king of the north and enter his fortress. He will fight against them and be victorious. He will also seize their gods, their metal images, and their valuable articles of silver and gold and carry them off to Egypt. For some years, he will leave the king of the north alone. Then the king of the north will invade the realm of the king of the south, but will retreat to his own country. His sons will prepare for war and assemble a great army which sweeps like an irresistible flood and carry the battle as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south will march out in a rage and fight against the king of the north, who will raise a large army, but it will be defeated. When the army is carried off, the king of the south will be filled with pride and will slaughter many thousands. Yet he will not remain triumphant. For the king of the north will muster another great army, larger than the first, and after several years he would advance with a huge army fully equipped." So just going through this verse by verse. So verse 6. So after some early indecisive struggles, the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucid kingdom will agree to share power peacefully. In order to seal this, Ptolemy Philadelphus will give his daughter Berenice to marry Antiochus II Theos, the heir to the northern Seleucian throne. This marriage in 252 BC will serve to make the two empires political allies. So after both the kings of the north and the south die in 246 and 245 respectively, the alliance will basically break up. Lodosis, the half-sister, will have Bernice and her son, the heir to the throne, poisoned. Because of this murder, Antiochus II will succeed the throne to the Seleucids. Verse 7. In revenge, Bernice's brother, Ptolemy III, will take the Egyptian throne and use it to attack Seleucus II, successor to Antiochus II, in what will be known as the Laodicean War, getting much territory from the Seleucids in Syria. Verse 8. Ptolemy III will return to Egypt in 240 BC with much booty and live out his reign in peace. Verse 9. Later, Antiochus, sometimes known as Antiochus the Great, will take the throne in the northern kingdom. He will attack the southern kingdom in 221 BC with some success, but will be forced to retreat by the Ptolemaic general Theodotus. Verse 10. Undaunted, Antiochus will return to attack in 218 to 217 BC, take the strongholds of Tyre, Gaza, and even Raphia, a fortress on the border of Egypt proper. Verse 11, however, this particular victory will be short-lived as Ptolemy IV will raise an army and visit disastrous defeat and Antiochus III, retaking all the conquered territory. Verse 12 to 13, after the death of Ptolemy IV, Antiochus III will raise an even greater army and attack the southern kingdom in 202 to 198 BC. This is pretty accurate stuff here. We've got to take heed from God's word. Going on in Daniel 11:14, it says, in those times, it's giving you a really specific timeline here. Many will rise against the kingdom of the south, those who are violent among your own people, in other words, the Jews, will rebel in fulfillment of the vision, but without success. So during this drawn-out campaign, many Jews will actually rebel against the southern kingdom and ally themselves with Antiochus. So imagine this. You have these scriptures. You're a Jew. You know these scriptures. Why start a battle you're already told you will lose? Well, there's only two reasons. One, you either don't read your scriptures, which, let's be honest, most people who profess to be Christians don't read the scriptures, and if they do, don't really know them. Or you're just rebellious. You don't believe that what God said is true. You know, like us, why fight against God's will for your life when you know God is too powerful for you to win against? 1 Peter 3:17, for it is better if it is God's will to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. Even if you suffer for doing good, God goes, it's still better to do my will. You know, are you being tempted to prove God wrong in your life like these proud, rebellious people? Maybe you wouldn't dare say, you know, I'm going to oppose God. But maybe it comes out in a different way. I'm going to prove my leader wrong. Or I'm going to prove to people that I know what I'm doing. You're saying exactly the same thing. You're just not putting the word God in there. All I hear in those statements is the voice of Satan when he says to the other angels that were kicked out of heaven, I know a better way, follow me. Rebellion against God, against his word, is foolish at best, more like stupid, and sadly, deadly. Do you have a rebellious heart? I know it's something I've had to fight against all my life. You know, I was brought up in a culture that elevates being individualistic, rebellious, and don't tell me what to do. You know why? I wasn't a Christian, it was satanic. I was being led astray, being promoted as my own God. And yet, when we read God's scriptures, what we find is in the joy of obedience is like, if I just do what God tells me to, my life will go well. That's called submitting to the will of God. We go on. You know, it's going to get really bad for the rebellious Jew and Gentile alike. He's trying to warn them. Sadly, we get warned, but we still don't obey. We carry on in Daniel chapter 11, verse 15. It says, then the king of the north will come and build up siege ramps and will capture a fortified city. The forces of the south will be powerless to resist. Even their best troops will not have strength to stand. The invader will do as he pleases. No one will be able to stand against him. He will establish himself in the beautiful land. Remember, that's Jerusalem. And we will have the power to destroy it. He will determine to come with the might of his entire kingdom and will make an alliance with the king of the south. And he will give him a daughter in marriage in order to overthrow the kingdom, but his plans will not succeed or help him. Then he will turn his attention to the coastlands and will make many of them, and take many of them. But a commander will put an end to his insolence and will turn his insolence back on him. After this, he will turn back towards the fortune of his own country, but will stumble and fall to be seen no more. So verse 15, Antiochus will defeat the Egyptian general Scopas, who will retreat to Sidon, and at Sidon he will be besieged and ultimately forced to surrender in 198 BC. Verse 16, as a result of this, Antiochus III will take all of Syria and Palestine from the Ptolemaic kingdom, including the promised land or the beautiful land. Actually, it's not Jerusalem, it's the whole land of Israel. In verse 17, in order to secure this victory, Antiochus will send his daughter Cleopatra to marry the young Ptolemy V. But this marriage alliance will not prove to be successful. They were actually brother and sister, but that wasn't seen as something wrong in the Egyptian monarchy, because basically they thought they would keep the land, the lineage pure, which is why a lot of the Egyptian pharaohs had a lot of defects. Verse 18, Antiochus had reached a great height of power, as he will go on to conquer the coast of Asia Minor in 196 BC, and even the margins of Greece in 192 BC. However, at the height of his power, the new power in the Mediterranean, the Romans will come into the picture. In the two battles of Thermopylae and Magnesium, the Romans bring to an end the expansion of the Seleucian power, decisively defeating Antiochus III. So now we're starting to see the full prophecies come of Daniel chapter 2, with the Romans at the bottom of the statue. Antiochus will suffer humiliation, pay a huge indemnity. He will be forced to send his son, later Antiochus IV, hostage to Rome, and after these events, he will return to Syria and die. So his son is sent to Rome. That's important to remember. His successor, Seleucus IV Philosopher, will send his prime minister, Heliodorus, through the northern kingdom to collect exorbitant taxes. This is even recorded in 2 Maccabees 3. In Daniel 11:20 it says, his successor will send out a tax collector to maintain the royal splendor in a few years. However, he will be destroyed, yet will not in anger or in battle. So for political reasons, Heliodorus will have Seleucus killed, i.e. Seleucus IV will not die in battle, he'll be assassinated. So there's a lot of prophecies going on here. Why? God is saying there's a build-up to what I'm coming to. The next bit is the really important bit. It's the mass persecution of the Jews. So if you're going to believe that this mass persecution is coming, you want to know that everything leading up to it is prophesied, so it gives you credence that this is also going to come true. So right now the stage is set of like, I've told you everything that has happened. It's all come true. So now I'm going to tell you what's going to happen next. Take warning. But of course they don't, which is really sad. But God still works. So Daniel 11 verse 21. This is the great persecution of the Jews. It says, he will be succeeded by a contemptible person who is not given the honor of royalty, who will invade the kingdom when its people feel secure, and he will seize it through intrigue. Then an overwhelming army will be swept away before him. Both it and a prince of the covenant will be destroyed. After coming to an agreement with him, he will act deceitfully, and with only a few people, he will rise to power. When the richest province feels secure, he will invade them and will achieve what neither his father nor his forefathers did. He will distribute plunder, loot, and wealth among the followers. He will plot the overthrow of the fortress, but only for a time. With a large army, he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south. The king of the south will wage war with a large and powerful army, but he will not be able to stand because of the plots devised against him. Those who eat from the king's provision will try to destroy him. His army will be swept away, and many will fall in battle. The two kings, with their hearts bent on evil, will sit at the same table and lie to each other, but to no avail, because an end will still come at the appointed time. The king of the north will return to his own country with great wealth, but his heart will be set against his holy covenant. He will take action against it and then return to his own country. At the appointed time, he will invade the south again, but this time the outcome will be different from what it was before. Ships of the western coastline will oppose him, and he will lose heart. Then he will turn back and vent his fury against the holy covenant. He will return and show favor to those who forsake the holy covenant. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. With flattery, he will corrupt those who have violated the covenant, but the people who know their God will firmly resist. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword or be burned or captured or plundered. When they fall, they will receive a little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. But some wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. So the successor of Seleucus IV is this despised Antiochus Epiphanes. So this is the guy who's like the worst persecutor of the Jews ever. He will not be presumed there, but he will use political intrigues to gain political allies in the kingdom and illegitimately seize the throne in the northern kingdom. So the prophecy of Daniel 11 focuses primarily in on the reign of this much despised ruler. In fact, verse 21 through 35 will be about the unfortunate relationship between this radical Hellenizer and the Jews. To give you some background, the rule of the Greek-Egyptian Ptolemaic dynasty over Jerusalem had been relatively benign. The Jews were allowed to pursue their own religion relatively unfettered. They were also allowed to appoint their own high priest. They were given a good deal of autonomy under the Ptolemaic governors. So it's ironic that the Jews supported Antiochus III in his battles against the Ptolemies. They welcome him to Jerusalem with open arms. It's also ironic that under the Seleucian kings, the fairly benevolent policies of Ptolemies were overturned in favor to a much harsher policy towards the native Jewish population. This was to prove especially true when Antiochus IV Epiphanes took the throne. Antiochus IV had been born in Athens and had spent 12 years in Rome as a hostage. And so as a pun on his name, basically Antiochus Epiphanes, meaning the manifestation of God, the Jews sarcastically called him Antiochus Epiphanes, meaning the madman. So when we think about the word epiphany, we go, oh, the light bulb came on. Well, they were going, yeah, the light bulb turned off. He was like the madman. Or for him, the light bulb came on and our light bulb turned off. He became convinced that the Greco-Roman culture should be the only acceptable culture for the people throughout his empire. Therefore, Antiochus set out on a policy of systematic Hellenizing the Jews. This means that he forced them to accept cosmopolitan Greek lifestyle with its mode of dress, political life, and most significantly, of religion. Many of the liberal Jews actually embraced this change. Just like the churches today, they go, well, we want to be friends with the world. But there was a hardcore, conservative, nationalistic, faithful Jew who were absolutely determined to oppose the Hellenizing policies of Antiochus IV at any cost whatsoever. In the process of him Hellenizing Israel, Antiochus had a gymnasium built in Jerusalem, and the athletes trained in the naked, in the nude. This was extremely offensive to the Jews. And in his arrogance, he forbade the circumcision of Jewish children under penalty of death. So he's now telling the Jews, you can't circumcise your children. This foolish policy pushed the faithful Jews beyond their tolerance, and open rebellion was a result. The intense persecutions Antiochus IV committed on these Jews, and the determination of the Jewish remnant to remain faithful no matter what, is the primary subject of this prophecy. Understand, to the reader, Daniel is telling these people 350 years before it happens. Verse 22, Antiochus IV Epiphanes will ally himself with a liberal Jewish leader, Jason, to attack and defeat the strictly orthodox high priest. Because of a bribe, Antiochus will appoint Hellenizing Jason as the high priest. But he will deceive Jason and use him to establish his own power over the Jews. Eventually, he will accept another bribe from another pretender, Menelaus, who will give the high priest to him. Verse 24, Antiochus will master of intrigue, attacking provinces when they are least prepared to defend it. He will use monies taken from one province as booty to bribe another to support him. This deceitful policy will succeed for him up to a point. Then after establishing his hegemony throughout Palestine and Syria, he will attack Ptolemy VI in about 170 BC. Antiochus will succeed in his campaign at least as much because of disunity in the Egyptian camp and because of his overwhelming power. Verse 26, because of a plot against him, some of his closest allies, Antiochus IV will defeat Ptolemy VI. Verse 27, they will meet up to sign an armistice and make agreements, but both rulers will act hypocritically and break their agreements. Ultimately, at least in part because of their deceitfulness, God will bring both kingdoms to ruin. Verse 28, after this victory, Antiochus will pass through Jerusalem. He will be welcomed by his puppet high priest Menelaus, but at this time he will confirm and extend the persecution against the Hasidim, the pious Jews. He will then return to Syria. In verse 29, after a very short truce, Antiochus IV Epiphanes will renew the attack on Egypt in 168 BC. Probably this attack would have resulted in final destruction of the Ptolemies by the Seleucians. Verse 30, however, seeing the potential rising of great power in the east under Antiochus IV, the Romans now decide to intervene. They will send a fleet of ships from Cyrus to support the flagging Ptolemaic power. This move will lead to the defeat of Antiochus IV. In a fit of rage, he then will return to Jerusalem and vent his anger on his enemies, the non-conforming Jews. Verse 31, it says, in what will be the most outrageous attack on the true Jewish empire in the history of the nation, Antiochus will set his soldiers to desecrate the temple. He goes on to outlaw the Jewish system of sacrifice in the temple at Jerusalem. He will also outlaw circumcision and Sabbath observance. He will tear down part of the Jerusalem wall. He will order the ceremonial worship of Greek deities by everyone. It says, you've got to worship Greek deities. He will have an image of the Greek god Jupiter hung in the temple of God. This is setting up the abomination which causes desolation. The Greek soldiers will perform disgusting pagan sexual ceremonies right there in the temple of God. He will even sacrifice a pig on the altar where sacrifices have been made to God. Antiochus will enforce laws of Hellenism, outlawing Jewish observance with the utmost cruelty. One of the most respected Jewish scribes, Eleazar, will be publicly flogged to death for refusing to eat pig flesh. A mother and her 7 children will be publicly murdered one at a time for refusing to sacrifice to a Greek god. So you're really starting to see here these mass persecutions that the Jews are being warned about. Verse 32, the victory of the Hellenizing party under Melanianus may seem sure, but the barbaric attacks of Antiochus will inspire a religious zeal in a minority of Jews who refuse to submit to this persecution of the madman. Those who truly have a relationship with God will always resist persecution. Verse 33, many courageous Jews will continue to observe the Sabbath, to circumcise their sons, and to teach about God. So for a period, their faithful attempts to obey God will result in many faithful Jews being slaughtered. The pious Jew Matthias will rise in revolt against the Greek persecutors. Matthias and his 5 sons will ultimately establish an independent Jewish nation. This family is going to be called the Maccabites. It's the Maccabite revolt, who established the Hasmonean dynasty. Verse 34, Matthias and his sons Judas Maccabees will experience some success in their rebellion, but in some insincere Jews will join them, which again is talked about. Traitors to the Jewish courts will help Antiochus temporarily overcome the rebellion, but during this time the true believers of God will have their faith refined and made spotless, as Daniel says. Ultimately, those who remain faithful will ultimately see the end of the persecution. At the appointed time, Judas and his army will move on Jerusalem and defeat the Greek sympathizers. They will enter the temple grounds, and in one of the most celebrated months in all Jewish history, they destroy the abomination of desolation and reconsecrate the temple of the true living God. This momentous event is still celebrated today in the Feast of Chanukah, ever since that great victory appeared. Although this persecution was a truly fearsome thing, the recommitment to the basic Judaism inspired amongst the people resulted in one of the great revivals in the history of Israel's people. So without this persecution, there wouldn't have been this hardcore remnant of Jews to carry on God's teaching. So in all of this, you see, Israel has become so compromised, so used to just, let's mix the world with the Jewish religion, that God says the only way to get this, the faith back to a purity, is to give mass persecution. Then we can get down to a hardcore remnant. So it's actually great historical irony that Antiochus IV attempted to annihilate the Jews, but it only resulted in purification. Thanks to these persecutions, the Jews were forced into a nation which was overall considered more devoted to God than ever. So I think about, how the old movement fell apart. Literally, we've got a far more committed, fired up, unbitter group now, forcefully advancing the kingdom of God, going to all the nations of all the world because of the persecution. As the famous saying goes, history repeats itself. In the first 3 centuries of Christendom, as Nero, Domitian, and their followers attempted to destroy the Church of Jesus Christ, they only succeeded in purifying and strengthening it, the thing they wanted to rub out. Those who experience persecution from family today would do well to bear this in mind. It is persecution that purifies a heart. You cannot be worried about upsetting your friends or your family for following the truth. It's actually the thing that makes many of them come into the kingdom. Persecution makes the church strong, not weak. It purifies the church as it purifies the individual. All right, coming in for a landing, the last little bit here. Enter the kings of Rome, Daniel 11:36. It says, the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed. For what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his ancestors or for the one desired by women. He will not regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. Instead of them, he will honor a god of fortress, a god unknown to his ancestors. He will honor her with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people, and will distribute the land at a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry, and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and will sweep through them all like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land. Remember, that's Israel. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control of the treasures of gold and silver and all the riches of Egypt, with the Libyans and Cushites in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the sea of the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. So now we see that this is now talking about the king of Rome. It is the leg of irons in Daniel chapter 2 and the indescribable beast of Daniel chapter 7. In other words, this passage, the king of the north has become the king of Rome. God is revealing to Daniel and to us how the persecutor of his people will be avenged. Historically, the destroyer of Greece was always Rome. The description given in this passage in question fits commonly what's known in history about the religion and the culture of the Roman Empire. Unquestionably, Rome did as he pleased, as Daniel says, throughout the Mediterranean region for several centuries. The power of Rome exalted and magnified itself above every god. In fact, although Rome began with a traditional belief in a number of gods, somewhat similar to the more sort of Greek pantheon style, eventually the chief god of Rome became Rome itself. The Romans called this god Roma, and the people throughout the far-flung empire started to worship this god of Roma. But from the time of Augustus on, people began worshipping the emperors rather than the less well-defined Roman god of war. So to a large extent, the Roman people abandoned their traditional gods of the past, and this fits exactly with verse 37 when he said, he will show no regard for the gods of his father. And then the description, he will honor a god of fortress, again, is an apt description of Rome's worship of the national god of war. So Rome itself, with its Roman power and all of its armies, became the center of worship. What about the phrase, he'll attack the mightiest fortress with the help of a foreign god and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him? Well, throughout the remainder of the 1st century BC and well into the first century AD, the Roman power was largely administrated through what were called client kings established as allies to Rome in this way. This is how the famous King Herod, the one who attempted to kill Jesus when he was a child, came to power. He was a client king. In other words, they said, hey, you can rule that, but you need a ruler underneath us and you're accountable to us. So this well-known Roman policy matches the uncanny way which Daniel describes. He will make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price. In other words, again, you can be king, but you've got to give us tribute. So the Roman policy of expansion also involved incorporating unfamiliar gods of conquered areas, soon to be conquered nations, into the Roman pantheon. So, for example, many Romans followed the cult of the Egyptian god Isis before that nation was subdued. This explains the phrase in the vision saying that with the help of a foreign god. So these policies are well known throughout Roman history. But one might ask, how did Daniel know about them in 536 BC? Well, the only way Daniel knew about it wasn't Daniel. It was God, because God knows your past, he knows your present, and he knows your future. That should humble us unbelievably. Then Gabriel goes on, is describing to Daniel the final end of the Ptolemy dynasty, the king of the south. This is the Battle of Actium, which took place in the year 31 BC. Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, fought and defeated Mark Antony and his ally Cleopatra. This battle was fought on land with chariots and cavalry, as Daniel says, but also the decisive victory was actually fought in a huge naval battle So Daniel describes this as a great fleet of the ships. However, Daniel's not done yet, or Gabriel's not done in the book of Daniel. He supplies even more information about this battle and about Octavian and what he will do after the battle. After the battle, Octavian, Mark Antony's army soon dissipated. King Herod, who basically had been an ally of Antony, described himself to Octavian and said, I've been humble to Antony, I can be humble to you. So basically they partner up, and with the help of Herod's army, mainly of Jewish people, Octavian consolidates his victory by taking most of the territory of the remnant Ptolemaic dynasty, including the rest of Palestine, which is the beautiful land, and Egypt as well, up to the upper regions of the Nile, the Nubians, and the coast of Africa of Egypt, the Libyans. Octavian, later the first emperor of Rome, known as Augustus, failed to take one significant part of the Ptolemaic territory. He did attack the Arab territories of Edom, Moabite, and the Ammonites, but he was unable to conquer them and bring them into submission. In fact, the Romans were unable to contact the Arabs until the reign of Trajan, well over 100 years later. So here, Gabriel is telling Daniel, look, he'll succeed here, and he won't succeed here. You know what? If I was a Jew, I go and live in the place where he's not going to go and succeed. But people get so stubborn. When they're told to move by God, they go, no, I don't want to. All the way through, you see the grace of God going, this is what's going to happen. This is where the battles are going to happen. This king will be victorious until this time and not that time. So if you really wanted a great life, all you need to do is follow the pattern of the battles and go, I'm going to move into all the places where there will be peace at that particular time. But people just go, no, I just don't believe it. It's too much inconvenience. How much does God need to tell us for us to respond? You know, a casual look at a historical map at that time of Augustus will show you that those parts had not actually been taken by the Roman Empire. So Octavian, or Augustus, was unable to complete his victory over the Arabs, and this then renewed the Parthian threat. So this report from the east that Gabriel tells Daniel about historically shows that when Octavian heard about the threats from the Parthians, he immediately sent his armies to defend against attack from the east. On his way to fight the Parthians, Octavian passed through the Palestine, pitching his royal tents between the seas, as it prophesies, i.e. between the Mediterranean and the Dead Seas in the Holy Land. So God tells his people concerning the Roman power, which brought into judgment the kings of the south. Yet he will come to his end and no one will help him. So the whole of Daniel, from the first chapter, is taking him from the beginning of Daniel's life to the end of it. And throughout all of his life, he prophesies the coming of the Persians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Throughout that, it's all building to, hey, I am in control. I know what's going on. I know you're going to go under an incredible persecution. And that's what it's all leading up to. But if you stay strong, you will be purified. This is meant to be frightening as the word of God is. It disturbs the comfortable, but it also comforts the disturbed. All I've got to do is keep righteous. God tells his people to bear in mind that the Roman power will be judged as well. There's an unmistakable parable between Daniel 11:35 describing the fate of the Greek power and Daniel 11:45 predicting the downfall of Rome. The great persecutors, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, went the same route as the Greek power, which he represented. God is telling his people that the great persecutors in the future, Nero, Domitian, Diocletian, and the other Roman princes will go the same way as well. They and their ungodly power will come to end, and no one, especially their almighty God of war, will be able to help them. Do not be afraid. Remain righteous no matter what the circumstances, because God rules the nation. Now, in conclusion, a man in the battle. You can see why this was an overwhelming vision. He's just laying out the specifics of all the future, including this mass persecution. Daniel sees the spiritual battle, that God is fighting hard behind the scenes. Then he's relayed the battle on earth. Question. Now we've gone through most of Daniel. Are you convinced that God knows what he's talking about and what he has written in his word? The Bible you hold in your hand today is true today for you as it was for Daniel. If you do, then why aren't you not only reading it, but really studying it? It will save your life if you let it. Amen.
To hear more from Dr. Joe Willis, check out his 2 books on Amazon, The Art of Spiritual Warfare, Practicals for Becoming a Prayer Warrior, and Money is the Answer for Everything. Click the links in the description below. Also, for more life-changing lessons, subscribe to his YouTube channel, Dr. Joe Willis.